Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm happy to be here with you again in the middle of the week, talking about the prophet Jonah and his experiences. Now, as you can see up at the top here, there's a light shining from someplace. I think it's a bright sunshine outside when I'm doing this, and I think that's what it is, but perhaps you can just ignore it. Well, we've talked about Jonah, and he was told by God to do something. He didn't do it. He went the exact opposite of what God told him. Got on a boat. Boat got in a huge storm. The people on the boat couldn't figure out what had happened, so they asked him if he was somehow the cause of it. He admits he is, and they tried to swim the boat or force the boat to shore and couldn't do it. So then we get to the point where the sailors are desperate. Now, maybe you've been desperate in your life. I felt like it at times. Life just isn't necessarily easy. I wish it were, but maybe it's better that it's not, because at least we have a chance to learn. If everything went right all the time, we might not pay much attention to what's going on. So here we find the next part of this process. And here's what it says in Jonah chapter 1, beginning with verse 15. Then the sailors picked Jonah up and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. Now Jonah had said, "Throw me over. I'm the cause of it. I don't want you to drown." They tried and couldn't find another solution, so they did what he said, and they threw him over. And as soon as he hit the water, the storm stopped. Now, if you were one of those sailors, what would you have thought? What would you have said? Well, I think the next verse tells us real, put it right there. It says the sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power and offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Now, this is interesting because previously it said they offered sacrifices to their own gods to stop the storm, and it didn't work. So at least they were sharp enough to recognize when God works, God works. Sometimes we want to explain God away. We want to somehow suggest that, well, while it could be that, it probably was something else. It's sort of like people who get healed and it seems like it's a miracle. I really don't care whether it was the medicine they took or the doctor that they visited or just prayer. Doesn't matter to me as long as it got done. I'm not picky. Well, the sailors were impressed. God's power changed their lives. Now, that's not part of the Jonah story that we normally talk about. But God's power changed their lives. And I'm just wondering, has God's power changed your life? What do you think about that part? We'll move on. So then it goes on to say, now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, let's see this scenario. Jonah's running from God, gets on a boat goes out to sea, great storm comes up. Everybody's scared to death. Finally, the sailors, with no other option, do what Jonah suggests, let him die, throw him in the water. He gets thrown in the water, the storm stops, and a great big fish swallows Jonah. Now, I don't know how that happened. I can't really imagine that. I'll just accept it for what it says, because something happened. It says for 3 days and 3 nights. That's a reference to something that happens later in history. It's called the resurrection, crucifixion. But it goes on to say that Then, when he got into the belly of the fish, then Jonah prayed. And it's interesting. Why didn't he do that beforehand? Why didn't he do something before? I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, if you're in the midst of trouble, then why don't you pray? I can understand if the trouble gets worse, you're praying, but why not pray at the outset? And maybe it won't get worse. I mean, he could have asked the soldiers to sailors to turn the ship around, take him back where he was, because God had something for him to do. I guess that didn't occur to him. So it says, while he's in the belly of the fish, he starts praying. And he prayed, and he prayed, and he prayed. And if that had been me, I would have done the same thing. And so it says, and he prayed. Let me read the first part of his prayer. I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and the Lord heard me. You see, even though Jonah had walked away from God, well, run away is a better word, God still heard his prayers. And he prayed for repentance. He prayed that he would change. He prayed all kinds of stuff. And I think he meant it, even though we might question that a little bit later. But when he found himself totally in a position that he couldn't do anything, he prayed. And God accepted his prayer, even though he had previously refused to do what God wanted him to do. Now, maybe that's you here. Maybe we need to know that regardless of how far we've run from God, the moment we'll turn, he'll be there. And he'll always be there. And then, to end today, it says, after all this praying, the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach. I don't know what he looked like, but he must have been one sorry looking fellow coming out of that situation. But now he's got another chance to do what God wanted him to do in the first place and to have avoided all of this to begin with. God works that way today, folks. Even when we run from him, he's still there. And the minute we turn, if we will just choose to do that, he will answer us and he'll be there and he'll give us another chance. If you were God, would you have done that? If this were you being God and writing the story, is that how you would have handled this situation? Well, thank goodness God's bigger than you and me. What do you think about it? Hope you have a wonderful day. If there's anything we do to help you out, let us know. We'll jump in as fast as we can with this everything powerful that we have that we can. So thanks for listening. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. I'll be back tomorrow. Tell you a little bit more about this guy, Jonah.